Seamus Murphy is a Corkman. Seamus Murphy is a stone carver, a sculptor, an artist.
Here in Fitzgerald's Park, Cork, we have a very exciting exhibition. We have, I think, 18 or 19 sculptors from all over Ireland exhibiting. To me, it's fascinating. For the first time, one sees a sculpture as one should see it, in a public place, and seeing it in all its dimensions. This is a work in cut steel by John Burke, a Waterford sculptor. The title Flight is quite good. It gives you the sort of excitement of flight, and it also has a great deal of energy in it. Visually, from any angle, it looks very well. This work here is a work of my own. It's entitled After Mass. It's a very early work, and it's carved in Kilkenny limestone and polished later. There is a clue in the title as to what I was trying to express. A woman coming from Mass and bringing from the church some of the reverence that she felt, and bringing that sort of thing outside, maybe for a few minutes, and then going into character in another way. This is a work by Oisin Kelly entitled Girl Dancer. The work is in bronze, and it's an Irish step dancer just about to spring into a dance. It's very nicely conceived, with the head and shoulders thrown back and the hair as if it was just disturbed by the motion of the feet. We're very pleased to have this little work, and I think we got it with the help of the Arts Council. It was one of the first little works we had, and it's very, very popular and very whimsical and lively. This is one of the most popular works in the park. Two bronze figures, again by Oisin Kelly. The title of the work is Men Gazing, and one has a very tall man and the other quite a stout man. And the two of them make a very good composition, and they are, I would regard, as being most suitable to a sculpture park. There has been a lot of comment by people looking at them, and one of them was that they were bird watching. And I heard General Tom Barry say when he was passing that they were the sort of men that Cork would want on the All-Ireland hurling team. On the western end of the park, in a very nice situation, are two works of mine. One, a Madonna entitled The Virgin of the Twilight in Kilkenny limestone, and the other, a bronze bust of Michael Collins. I had the plastic cast in my studio, and I thought there should be something of Collins in his own county. Mr. Con Murphy of Douglas saw that the thing was cast in bronze, paid for it, and then presented it to the Sculpture Park Committee. People said to me, I remember at the time, that it was much too big. It's about 4 times life size. But Collins was known as the big fella, and it wasn't that he was that physically big, but that there was bigness about him. And he also had a most suitable face, and he looks like a Florentine, flat and big, and almost a Renaissance figure. He's very well placed there with his eye on the gate, and I think a great success. Virgin of the Twilight was in my possession for at least 25 years, until a group of people in Cork got together and they decided they'd buy it for the city. It occurred to one of them, the best place to put it would be in a public place like Fitzgerald's Park. It was the thing that actually started the Sculpture Park Committee, and in that way we have created quite a lot of interesting bits of sculpture all round. All the lines are slow, there are no fast lines on it. The curves are slow, it's a bit ponderous, and the face is heavy, exaggerated, made that way deliberately so. She's looking at the child, and the child is just like all other children, unaware, but the mother is aware. She is aware of what's going to happen to the child. She's aware of Calvary, in other words, and she is tensed up and sad. That's the mood of the work. In direct contrast is a work of mine in West Cork at Ballyvourney. That also is it's carved in limestone, and it's part of a shrine to St. Covenant, the local saint. There is a great folklore built up around her. We do know that she's been associated with bees, St. Covenant and the bees. She has a West Cork face and a West Cork cloak, and in that way she is firmly fixed in the district. That cloak is still used all around Ballyvourney, Macroom, even in Bandon, and at one stage was used all over Ireland. She is very much a sort of folk figure, a fine face, I think, interesting, and has a sort of reality. That in contrast with the Virgin of the Twilight, which is, of course, a work of contemplation. This here, then, is our sculpture park in Cork. Very intimate and very small, maybe, but a great breakthrough. And it certainly is creating a new public for sculpture and giving people a chance of walking around and looking at it without the hazard of the motor car. Personally, I think sculpture should be removed from the streets and put into places like that where there is, and where people have a chance of reflecting on the various works. This city has not been always kind to the artist. It has probably its own reasons and its own interests, and a society like anything else must cultivate. The arts must be cultivated, just as you learn to read, as you learn to play an instrument. And Cork seems to have been a little too busy making money, but certainly very little money comes the artists' way in Cork. They have all, as a result, had to leave. Sean O'Fallon and Frank O'Connor are two very good examples. They left when they were young, and one doesn't leave when one is as young as that without absolute frustration. There was no sort of climate there for them, and anybody who wrote books was always suspected of being a sort of an odd, queer fella, not taken seriously. Frank O'Connor and O'Fallon always wrote about Cork in a sort of love-hate relationship. They have done a great deal to make the Cork that I knew alive. It's come to life. I know it exactly. And sentence after sentence, walk after walk, down its various streets, looks at the buildings and the Lee itself and the river and the atmosphere. It evokes the old city of Cork that I knew. Blarney Street, Mallow Lane, Shandon Street, all of the north side, various little streets and lanes tippling away down into the Lee, and the other ones going north up to Granabraher. Cork Green is wonderful. Threshold of Quiet evokes it too, especially the description of Stevie Galvin leaning over Parnell Bridge and thinking of his brother who was away in the Pine Star, wondering when she'd come home. All that mood is part of Cork. It's the quintessence of Cork, the Cork I knew, the Cork that made me, and the Cork I love. I came back from Paris in 1932. I had been there on a scholarship and decided to try and get some work around. J.A. O'Connell's, where I had served my apprenticeship, were very slack. There was no hope there, and the whole building trade was at a standstill. Plasterers, masons and carpenters, idle, walking the streets. It was the hungry 30s, no commissions, nothing doing. So I decided I'd have to do something about it, and I courageously got over the wall and went into the next yard and set up business.
I tried to do busts of my friends. Some of them I succeeded in doing, but I was very conscious of making a sort of record of the people whom I thought were creative and who were almost as poor as myself at that time. I asked them to know would they sit for me. Most of them were very obliging and did. The only trouble was that I built up a large gallery and they brought me in no money. So what I did then was to continue on with my stone carving and monumental work, and that provided the bread and butter. This head of Freddie May I like very much. An extraordinary thing about it is that people tell me it's a self-portrait. I fail to see any resemblance between myself and Freddie, except that I had at one stage quite an affinity with him. He is an artist, and he had all sorts of personal problems and trouble, especially with his music, and he wrote very fine music and had a good deal of stuff performed in the BBC. This is one of my own favourites, Sean O'Rear Dawn. He has a very interesting head from a modeller's point of view, but he is also a most interesting man. He was a great challenge because he has a sort of scintillating, his mind is so fast, and as soon as you're in a sort of contemplative mood, looking and trying to get at him, you get a flash from him that would completely throw you off the job you were doing. So you had to get back again onto it and look then through him. And this is my effort at looking through Sean O'Rear Dawn, not looking at him. This, of course, is a head of Corkery, Daniel Corkery, a writer, professor, teacher. He was my teacher at St. Patrick's National School, and to him I would say that I owe everything, insofar as he was the first person to make me aware of what art was, and not what art was, he would never discuss art, but how important drawing was, and how important painting was, and saw that I went to the School of Art. From there I was collected as a stone carver. The man himself was very good because I wasn't the only one that Corkery looked after. He looked after anybody that he felt had talent. The wonderful thing about this is that it wasn't self-conscious. You didn't feel that you were being directed into a road. All you knew is that you were given things you wanted to do. The same would stand for Frank O'Connor. I think he had a great brain and he was an artist also, but without being a poor boy, as he explains himself, in an only child, he wouldn't have had a book, no one to direct his reading, and Corkery gave him the right books to read. I think that was a great help to any young person struggling like that. Sean O'Fallon did not come under Corkery's influence as much or anything like O'Connor's because he had the advantages of a secondary education, while O'Connor was regarded as being unfit for a secondary education. O'Fallon got from secondary school to college, but he was a real scholar and he still has a scholar's mind, and I think he's done a tremendous job for Ireland when he produced the magazine called The Bell. John Joe McCarthy, a stonecutter out of a dynasty of stonecutters. He is a subject for James Joyce. I couldn't attempt to say anything like what one could say about him. He was a violent man, not at peace with himself or anyone else. He went off in the First War, joined the Munster Fusiliers, and served right through it, and came back and went back to stonecutting. He was a good craftsman, but he had this thing in his nature. What you'd say, I suppose, if there wasn't a row there was a makings of a row when he arrived. Well, he'd be what my father would call a liberty farmer. Outside the liberties of Cork, there were certain rights and certain dues and so on. Well, the liberty farmers were notoriously mean. If they gave a penny going into a church, they'd wait patiently for the halfpenny change. But he wasn't that sort of a man himself, but he was surrounded by people like that. He's the sort of man that created the Land League, beat the evictions. He stayed there rooted and nothing could shift him. Acts of Parliament, governments or armies wouldn't shift that man. And in that way, he's terribly important. He's the story of Ireland. He's the sort of solid thing. I thought of him in that way, and that's why I sort of carved it that way, by leaving the big sort of rough base there, and he just planted in it, an integral part of it. This head here is my father, or at least my father as I saw him. which is the great problem with that head, because I was still looking at him. Looking at him in the sense I was trying to understand him more so than looking at him. That is one of the things about modelling. There's no good in setting up somebody there and saying, I'm going to do a head of this person, unless there's communication on the other side. That subject is going to inform you by a look, a gaze, a manner. You have nothing to go on. I mean, the physical thing is the thing you do with your hands. You get the clay together, knead it, put it up. But what you really want is some sort of feeling, some sort of connection between you and the sitter. And if that comes off at any stage, well, then the work is great pleasure, and it's usually good. It takes two people, I often said, to make a bust, the sitter and the sculptor. This thing I'm working on now, it's a portrait bust and posthumous bust. Very difficult. You're working from a set of photographs which are very often not satisfactory. Profiles are short and three-quarter views are short, and you have to more or less develop it as best you can. Not really a satisfactory way of doing it, but it's often necessary for a record and people want to have them. On the other hand, working from a live model is a very different thing. There's a stimulation from the sitter, and that stimulation is the thing which, it's a challenge to you, because you will try to get involved in the personality. At the same time, the artist within you, the sculptor within you, will try to not to be sidetracked by the personality, but to see clearly into the man's, I don't know, it's not soul, but to see into his character. To see into his character and to try and find out what sort of a person he is, in your opinion. That's very important, because you are not the last judge at all. Other people may see him very differently. But if you are honest with yourself, and as an artist, while you may do a very good, lively bust of him, you may, by accident, also produce a work of art. The trade is finished as we knew it, but the evidence of our workmanship is there for all time, we hope. It's in the streets of Cork, and it's in the public buildings of Cork, and that sort of craftsmanship, we hope it will endure, and we hope people will look at it with some sort of reverence.
Because a good number of those huge buildings in Cork City, even the City Hall, in Cork City, was built with a Harley limestone.
It was?
The courthouse in Cork was built with a Harley limestone. Bristol Cork, actually, of course, would take from the quarries here.
Yeah.
I had to start in the stone quarrying trade in the right hand way. I was into the quarries, and I can guarantee I didn't like it. You had to look at the stone up on top of the quarry.
Yeah.
And when the quarrymen blasted it down to you, you wanted a certain portion of that stone that came down. Well, it might be 3 times bigger than the piece you wanted. Of course, the quarryman then came along and he, with a sledge, and he brought that down, and eventually he gave it to you, but still it was about 1.5 too big.
In the old days, you had to lay it up and then try and make off a face.
Yeah. We had to do that here in Harley. We had to do that.
You had to do it always in Ireland, because that's the type of stone it was. And put in a draft at one end, and
that's right.
Put down the edge, and put a draft on the other end, and try and take the stone out of twist.
That's right.
And sight it properly, and then
there was 2 ways, and then the 3 way at the
crossway, and then punch it, chisel it, chisel it, and get it right. You know, when you had that face ready, then when you had one square face, you could then work on the edges and work on the rest of it.
But you had to get your hammer and punch. You were told how to do it, you see. Get some kind of a shape to it, and I can tell you that was hard work in a hot summer's day. inside in the quarry.
Yeah.
But eventually, of course, with a few cut fingers and all this kind of thing, and you would be getting into the trade, you know, and eventually you would find yourself
Hello, Durham.
improved.
Hello, Jerome.
You know,
What are you
we were
having?
discussing stone cutting.
Yes.
I'll have a beer, please.
But as I was saying, Seamus, you actually learned your trade in the quarries in those days. You had no money,
No wages at all.
not a bit. For 3 years.
Well, you were worse than I was, because I started. I got nothing for the first 12 months, and I got a half a crown for the second year, and that was extended to another half a crown
Slaughter.
for the second year, and I was working 3 years, and I had 7 and 6pence a week.
You would get a fine for the week's work, so no?
There was not,
There was no
not
pints.
much anyway.
There were no pints.
There were no pints.
10 shillings I had when I went to work.
Then my uncle, he died rather unexpectedly here in 1937. Well, I hadn't been out of my time. I should do 9 years at that time.
Yeah.
To be a fully fledged stone cutter, you should do 9 years.
Well, we had that divided in the most extraordinary way. You spent 7 years established apprenticeship. Then there was a year as an improver. That pushed it on to 8. This, as far as I can make out, was an effort by the employers to see that you didn't get full wages until you were really fully fledged.
Halfway through then.
Then there was a year where you were supposed to be under the scrutiny of the foreman to decide whether you were a man or not.
Yeah.
And after that, you had to get full wages. But then you were also sacked. I discovered, anyway, in my case, then you were costing too much. And you had to go then, as they did of old, as a journeyman, and fight your way around and try and hold your hold. That was your standard. If you weren't up to it, you didn't get the money. The measurement was very simple.
Do you remember the journeyman stone cutter, Seamus?
I remember one particular man called the Gabon.
Oh, yes.
He was known as the
I
Gabon.
often heard of that name, yes.
The Gabon, he was he's obviously the thing was derived from the Gabon Sayer.
Gabon, yeah.
Gabon Sayer was the sort of mythical mason of Ireland, and the Gabon, my particular Gabon, was quite an extraordinary little man, and old Tim Maloney from Ballyclaw, and a man from Tullamore, I can't remember his name now, but they knew about him, and when they heard that the Gabon had arrived, it seemed to be as if almost God had arrived. And my sort of memory of him was this small little man coming in through the wicket with a bowler hat, very much down.
Where did he come to, Seamus?
Into J. O'Connell's
yes.
Watercourse Road. He was on tramp.
Yeah.
And he came in and he looked around and he gave some sort of he frightened me anyway, I was very young at the time, and he gave some sort of a little screech or shout. And they all dropped tools and they said, "Here's the Gabon." And old Tim Maloney from Ballyclaw came out and said, "A national for the Gabon." And I didn't know what a national
It was
meant.
a collection.
It was a collection.
That was the usual, of
That
course.
was the usual. So the collection was made, and the Gabon sat down, and they gave him, they made tea for him, and they all talked to him. And this was wonderful, because this was the first time they got an insight into what a man like this was about. They then proceeded to cross-question him about every single, a whole lot of stonecutters, people I never heard of, whole quarries, where he had come from, and he supplied them with all sorts of information.
Yeah.
We had a number of them here too, mind you, those journeymen.
Did you ever hear of a stonecutter named Charles Harold?
Oh, I did. He was a very tall man, and he always looked on things with a disastrous view, like, you know.
Yes.
When the Shannon scheme was being built, he said, the first day he heard about it, he said, that would blow us from Limerick to hell.
From Limerick to hell.
Yes.
Well, I always thought hell started in Limerick.
Yeah.
The trade was always called the dust. He's one of the dust. And just like the millers, wherever there's dust, there's drink. Because you can't have dust without some sort of thing to
wash it away.
to wash it away.
Including blacksmiths.
Well, the blacksmiths have the same problem with the slack and the heat. There's no good in eating a bun while you're trying to make a headstone or while you're trying to shoe a horse. A drink is much easier.
Yes.
A great friend of the Hickeys, Mick Brew, or Boy Brew, as we used to call him in Cork, who was from the village of Arla, and I remember telling me once, and we always remember when you get a sense of shock, but he said to me one day, and the sense of shock came because I doubted him for the first time. He said the Hickeys were the oldest stone-cutting family in Ireland.
Yes, they are too.
And I thought that was too great a claim to fame for the Hickeys.
Yeah.
But I discovered later when I went with him to Kilcrea that the man was perfectly right. I saw stone signed Hickey, Arla, dated 1780. This is before Robert Emmet's rebellion, before the 98 rebellion, and Hickey, Arla on them. So he was.
I saw they were in the neighbourhood of Hadley for 400 years, so I think we were always connected with limestone.
Yes. Well,
you see, my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, they were all stonecutters.
Yes.
And I think actually that now at the present time, we are in the 5th generation of stonecutters.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Amazing. It's amazing. It's a wonderful tradition. A wonderful tradition to have. My trade, that is the tradition of stone carving and of building in stone, is a very old one in Ireland. Right down the country, there are wonderful examples of stonework. With the development of the Norman French orders, Cistercian orders, Franciscans, they came and they built some wonderful abbeys. Stone was used as timber is used today. It was used for everything. People were absolutely familiar with stone. It was always in the ground, it was right near you, and you built your abbeys right near it, as they built them near the streams. You had to have water for the mortar, and you had to have water to live. So nobody was foolish enough to build an abbey far away from a river. When I see an abbey like Kilcrea, it's a very moving experience. Not so much the concern of aesthetics, so much as the marvellous achievement with a most unwieldy material. And stone can be cantankerous and difficult. But Arla was always described as a bitch of a stone, and I'm sure the monks had the same thing to say about it. This is a very fine tomb, the tomb of Arthur Larey, who was killed at Carriganema. It's a table tomb and carries a wonderful inscription composed by his wife, Eileen Dove. Lo, Arthur Larey, generous, handsome, brave, slain in his bloom, lies in this humble grave. Died 4th of May, 1773, aged 26 years. This is the choir where the monks or the priests would say their office. On the left is the tomb of the founder, Cormac Lyther MacCarrig. It was traditional that the founders were buried on the gospel side of the churches. This is one of the finest stones I've seen anywhere. 18th century, beautifully cut Roman lettering and a very nicely designed top. I noticed it's signed D. Hickey, Arla. It has the motif, the cock and the pot, which I think comes from an old medieval legend. The cock, when he heard of the betrayal of Christ at Gethsemane, came from the pot and screeched or crowed. It has an IHS and some decorative tree treatment with two little birds, and it makes a lovely pattern. The style of the stone itself is just a simple scantling and nicely moulded with the bead and fillet, and the whole thing is very, very pleasing indeed, and a really grand example of first-class craftsmanship. This is the main part of the abbey, the cloister. It usually had a grass centre with an arcaded walk all round. It was used by the priests or monks for meditation. The stonecutters always went and looked at graveyards. Looking at other men's work was always interesting. You always learned something from it. You got a chance at despising something also. Here we have a picture gallery spanning nearly 200 years. It contains various sorts of headstones. Early 18th century ones with the nice lettering and good shape and well masoned. The classical with the urn from the early 19th century when everybody was talking about Grecian urns. All this classical concept which was brought in by Byron, Shelley and Keats. We have railed in sections also with iron railings, which of course shouldn't be allowed in any graveyard, but were part of a period when graves were robbed and body snatching went on to help the students in the medical schools. Over here we have an intriguing combination of stones side by side. One 18th century stone with lovely lettering and nicely designed head and nicely carved top. In the centre, a Celtic cross headstone, which is a very good type of stone. It allowed you a fair amount of room for an inscription, which is one of the faults of a Celtic cross. The dice stone was always too small and got filled up very quickly. Then you have a stone much later, I think it would be roughly about 1870. It has inserted marble panels and a cross put on top. Indeed, very poor craftsmanship and no taste at all. Then you have headstones where ornamentation takes over. Funereal arrangement of flowers and crosses, very sentimental, carved in Italian marble, really vulgarized, lettering crowded and full of mouldings that belong to wood rather than stone. Really no display of taste at all. It reminds me of a few lines from a poem by Emily Dickens, the New England poet. Ostentatious tombs proclaiming to the gloom how dead they are. If Danny Mellett, one of the characters out of Stone Mad, were here, he'd say, "What's all this old guff about stone? We have it morning, noon and night. Stone, the bloody word looms up everywhere." And why wouldn't it? Because our work is to be seen in town, village and country, and the men who have come before us have left us a heritage to be proud of. They have certainly affected me. Stone is in my system, and I doubt if I'll ever get it out of it.